What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today, I am about 6 years late for this video, but I want to talk to you about Over the Garden Wall. This is a 10-episode miniseries that aired on Cartoon Network in the latter half of 2014. This is a show run by Pat McHale, who worked on Adventure Time for a little bit. And that was all that I knew about the series going into it. I did not know anything else about it. Didn't know the premise, didn't know anything about the characters or this world. I went into this about as cold as you possibly can. But I was a fan of Adventure Time, still am, and so I went into this because everyone on the internet talked about how great this show was when it first came out, and somehow I just remained very spoiler-free on it up until I got it for Christmas last year. And so I wanted to go ahead and watch it, and then I did, and I wanted to talk to you about it a little bit. Now, if you are not a fan of Adventure Time kind of has this reputation that I don't think it entirely deserves. The best way that I can describe what I feel like people think about Adventure Time, they think that it's this crazy, wacky internet humor where characters will say something random, haha, this is funny, that's like a meme that you would see on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and I don't think that's entirely deserved. There might be a little bit of that energy with Adventure Time, but I think it's a better show than what its detractors give it credit for. But if you don't like Adventure Time, I would still recommend that you give Over the Garden Wall a chance, because this is a very different show than Adventure Time. Really, the only connection here is Pat McHale. And whenever you take one person out of a big group of people who all worked on a show and then give them a separate show to work on, generally, you're not going to have a very similar show. I can think of numerous examples where you'll take a big group of creators and then you'll kind of split them up and give them all their own thing, and each separate thing that they all work on is incredibly different than the common thing that they all have together. This doesn't really have that much in common with Adventure Time. So if you're not a fan of Adventure Time, first of all, I would recommend that you give it a shot, but also I would recommend that you give this a shot because it's not anything like Adventure Time. Now, slightly getting into spoilers here, I'm going to compare this to a comic book that I read, and there's no real good way for me to do this, but if you've read the comic, you might be able to figure out a pretty big spoiler from this show by me comparing it to the comic. So, spoiler warning, but there's no real easy way for me to do this. Hopefully, this is a relatively unknown comic that won't spoil this show, but this kind of reminded me of a comic from the late 90s, early 2000s called Telos by Mike Wieringo, and I'm not going to spoil the specific thing that this reminded me of from Telos, but there is one major plot conceit from Over the Garden Wall that reminded me a lot of a very similar thing from Telos. Now, it's done in a more upbeat, positive, happy ending kind of way here, and not necessarily ending, because it's like 2/3 of the way through this series when the thing happens that I'm thinking of, but it's done in a more happy way here than it was in Telos, but I won't talk about what it is, but if you have read Telos and you liked it, first of all, if you haven't, go ahead and read Telos. I'm just recommending stuff all over the place with this video, but I really like Telos. I think that's a really fun, good fantasy comic series, kind of a limited thing. But if you have not read Telos, then I would still recommend that you do it. But if you have, you might know what I'm talking about here with Over the Garden Wall. But basically, I don't want to get too heavy into spoilers here, but this series is about two brothers, or actually, well, yeah, two brothers. I was going to spoil something else, but I'll just leave that as a surprise to you. Two brothers who are lost in the woods trying to get home. That's the plot of this miniseries, and there are all kinds of... There's 10 standalone episodes, but they all build together over one, basically 2-hour movie. Each episode is, I think, about 10 minutes long, and so it's kind of like a big movie, but each episode also is its own little unit of entertainment, and I really like that. Now, I can't imagine that anyone would say, I want to just pop in episode 8 real quick and watch it on its own. You might want to do that, but I think you're going to have a more rich unit of entertainment, I don't know why I just said that, if you watch the whole thing together. Now, even if you have seen the series before, I still can't really imagine that someone would say, I just want to watch episode 3 because of that one thing. You might do that, but I think for me, whenever I watch this again in the future, I'm still going to want to go through and watch the whole thing. Now, I actually watched all of it just sitting in one sitting, but in the future, I might say, I'm just going to watch 3 episodes right now, and then I'll watch 3 episodes tomorrow, but I would still go from beginning to end. I don't think anyone would want to just sit down and start with episode 5. Definitely don't do that. If you've never seen the series, I know I'm being very vague here, but this is one of those shows that I really think your experience is going to be lessened if you know big plot points going into it. So I'm trying to be as spoiler-free as possible for anyone who hasn't seen it and is still on the fence about it. But I can't imagine that anyone would want to just start in the middle and just jump around. With some shows, you can do that. Speaking of Adventure Time earlier, you can do that with Adventure Time for the most part. With this show, you really do want to start from beginning to end. Now, I have it on DVD. I'm sure it's available on Blu-ray, maybe on digital streaming. I don't really know, like on Amazon Prime or something. I'm not sure about that. I don't really like watching stuff on digital media like that. But if you do have whatever form of access you have to it, I would still recommend starting at the beginning. I think that's how you're best going to be able to enjoy this thing. So basically, like I said, the plot is two brothers who are accompanied by a bluebird, and they are trying to get home. There are twists and turns in the road that they are taking, and also in the plot as we are seeing it unfold. I will say that the characters take a few episodes for you to really fall in love with them. For the first couple of episodes, I wasn't really sure about any of these characters, especially the bluebird. She was coming across very coarse and rude to some of our other characters, but that totally makes sense by the time you get to the end of the series. It makes sense why she's acting the way that she is. You've also got the older brother, Wirt, and his behavior. He's very cautious. He's kind of, going to dip his toe in the water before he just jumps right in, and that is a foil to his younger brother, Greg, who is all impulse and absolutely no control. And Greg took the longest for me to get to like, and by the end of the series, I do like him, but he does take a while for me to get there. The other two characters, I fell in love with them quite a bit earlier than I did with Greg. There are times where Greg does annoy me a little bit, and I hope that whoever made the show, I hope that they're not watching this video. They're probably not, but Greg was a little annoying at times, and I don't want that to detract you from watching the show. And I compared this a little bit, or actually contrasted this to Adventure Time earlier. Like I said, this is not the same kind of annoying that you might be thinking of if you're thinking of Adventure Time. This character, Greg, is nothing like annoying characters like Finn from Adventure Time, or what's that show, Star versus the Forces of Evil, where it's these characters who are just wild and energetic and bouncing all over the place. It's not exactly like that. Greg is much more subdued than some of those other characters. SpongeBob, he's not like those characters, but in the context of this show and compared to some of these other much more subdued characters, Greg did take me a little bit longer to fall in love with. I did eventually fall in love with him, it just took a little bit longer. But overall, I really love this series. I definitely want you guys to check it out, and I don't want to spoil a whole lot. My favorite episode was the one where they were on the boat with the frogs. I'm going to say that. Hopefully I'm not spoiling too much, but if you've seen it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I see what you... Yeah, I like that one too. So that was my favorite episode. But anyway, I hope you guys will check this out, and I hope that you guys like this video. And if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be back next week with some other videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.